So we do have a very big room here today, excellent, and we have a setup where we've got a round table in the middle that will have 3 moderators and a discussion, and then observers, and I understand there are notepads and places to note questions because we're not necessarily going to have time after the discussion in the central stage with the 3 different parts of the session today. So we do invite this deep dive discussion and then wider reflections to be shared after the session. But thank you very much again for joining us, and we'll be talking about unlocking the cement and concrete innovation and deployment. I'm Jen Carson. I have the pleasure of being Head of Industry at the Climate Group and very pleased to host you today. So for those of you who are not aware, the Climate Group is an international NGO based here in London. Most of our colleagues are here, but we have offices in New York, Delhi, Beijing, and Amsterdam. And our mission is really to drive climate action fast. Again, as many of you may already be aware, what we're doing is bringing together powerful networks of business and government. So half of our colleagues focus on the business-led initiatives that we run, Concrete Zero being one of them, and half of our colleagues focus on our Under 2 coalition that is working with 270 regional and state government actors and policymakers to really translate a lot of national-led climate policy into on-the-ground work. So we mobilise and unlock that collective action to really move whole systems. We've got our energy work, our transport work, and here we're talking about our industry work. So we're literally shifting these global markets and global policies to materialise much faster carbon reductions. With the support of Innovation Zero and this session's sponsor, Vividian, very pleased to bring us all together and have this discussion about accelerating the scale-up of clean technologies and solutions that are needed to decarbonise specifically the cement and concrete sector. So we've got a significant challenge. It's about 8% of global emissions. That's huge, coming from this single material stream. We know that new construction is forecast to be the size of Paris every week for the next 40 years. So we've got a real essential challenge to be addressing right now. And that's why the Climate Group, in partnership with World GBC, launched the Concrete Zero initiative, and we're creating that clear market signal to create a new business as usual for net zero concrete. So we were only actually launched not even a year ago, just back in July. We've already got a strong membership base of 30 organisations, many here represented today, that are not only committing to time-bound procurement around their concrete that looks to 2050, so 100% by 2050 must be net zero concrete. But more importantly, they've taken the step to make a 30% low emission concrete commitment by 2025, so 2 years, and then 50% in 2030. So members like AKT2, Ramble, Lend-Lease Europe, SCS Railways, Thornton Tomasetti, all with us here today and immediately stepping up to that challenge. So maybe a question around why we focus on concrete and not cement. That's really all down to the opportunities around innovation, which of course is a topic that we're here to discuss today. So there's no silver bullet, there's no one-size-fits-all solution. It's really in the delivery of a diversity of technologies that we need to be looking and then scaling up those approaches. It's about that cross-sector collaboration that we already see very specifically in a lot of the organisations that we're working with, that's actually going to materialise what we need to see in the time frame that we need to see it. So again, that's why we're really pleased to bring this discussion together, to listen to the issues at hand, discuss the solutions, and understand how we can work better together as an industry. So we've got a number of fantastic representatives around our central table, and in a moment I'll ask you to pass the mic around and introduce your name and organisation. And as I said, observers, we'd really love to hear from you once the session has ended and have a discussion and keep this momentum going. So could I invite Paul King is near a microphone. Would you like to start?
Hello, everybody. Good to be here. My name is Paul King, and I'm Managing Director of Sustainability and Social Impact for Lendlease Europe, a large property and infrastructure company. Thanks.
Hi, thank you as well. My name is Paul Astle. I am the decarbonisation lead for roundtable, a international engineering consultancy. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Athena Papacosta. I'm Sustainability and Carbon Lead for SES. SES delivering is a Tier 1 contractor for the HS2 main civils works for the London tunnels.
Hi, I'm Will. I'm at BSI, and I'm sort of the project managing the development of a new standard in low carbon concrete technology.
Hi, I'm Scott Thompson, Director of Carbon Mark, a decarbonisation sustainability company.
Ali Naini, Managing Director of Turquoise. We've been doing clean tech investing for 20 years.
Hi everyone, I'm John Hartley. I'm the CEO of Levidian. We're a clean tech company that provide nanomaterials for concrete and cement and hydrogen.
Hi everyone, I'm Diana Casey. I'm Director of Cement and Energy and Climate Change at the Mineral Products Association, which represents UK cement and concrete producers.
Hello, I'm Ian Riley. I'm the CEO of the World Cement Association.
Hello, I'm Emily Kunkel. I'm a Vice President at Thornton Thomas Seti. We are primarily a structural engineering firm, but my focus has been on the decarbonization.
Hi, I'm Simon Bolter, Director of Semblend. We're a cement blending and import company based in the UK.
Hello, I'm Stafford Lloyd from Innovate UK. We are the UK's innovation agency, and I'm ramping up a programme focused on low carbon concrete.
Hello everybody, David Watson from AK82, Civil and Structural Engineers. I'm a technical director there and a structural engineer by profession.
Hi everyone, I'm Sam Draper, CEO of Ceratec, and we're a spin-out company from Imperial College London producing new sustainable cement materials.
Hi there, I'm Romain Richely from Bouygues UK. We are a developer and main contractor in the south of England.
Hi, I'm Suneet Shiraprasad, and I'm co-founder of a startup called Rare Earth Global. We produce decarbonized materials out of the hemp plant, so it can replace concrete, cement, and plastics.
Afternoon, everyone. My name is Daniel McKell. Work for John Sisk. We're building a tractor, currently based up in Wembley, a large residential development.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Excellent. Thank you very much. So I'll just introduce now the three moderators with a slight more context to each of their roles, and then we'll pass over to John Hartley to hear from Levidian, today's sponsor. So we had Diana Casey, who she's already introduced herself as Director of Cement and Energy and Climate at Mineral Products Association, who are also a Concrete Zero technical advisory take that form on our body. And then she is leading experts that tackle energy and regulatory issues, cement standards, and also managing innovation projects for the UK cement sector. Ian, as he mentioned, is CEO of the World Cement Association and has been in that position since 2019, but also on several other boards and advisory positions with different companies based in the climate action and climate tech ecosystem. And before that, he was the China country head for Holcim. And John Hartley, who we have as CEO of Levidian, I will now pass to some opening remarks as well.
Hi everyone, and thank you, Jen, for setting the scene for the discussion today. I just want to start by reiterating a figure that Jen quoted, which was 8%. So 8% of all emissions just from concrete and cement. And for those of you who were here yesterday at the start, we heard from climate scientists about the effects on the world if we don't get emissions in order. So if you want to talk about a place to make an impact, you're sat in the right room for the next hour or so. Not only can we make a difference here, but concrete is essential. Like, it's essential for the world economy. It's essential for paving the way, excuse the phrase, given it's concrete, to more prosperity and more jobs as we grow. So we have to collectively move to a lower carbon concrete and cement. And many of you in the room today are pushing for that transition. So whether it's new methods, new materials, or a combination of the two, there's loads of opportunity to do that and to make it work. So today's discussion will focus on this question of how do we lower carbon intensity and how do we get not just to net zero as a sector, but beyond that to a point where concrete and cement can be a carbon sink. So that's the challenge. So we know that the focus here requires a number of areas of improvement. We'll talk about how do you reduce the carbon intensity of the materials that are used? How do we replace those materials with others? Ideally, they've been recycled or reused. How do we electrify or displace the fossil fuels in the energy generation that our processes require? And we'll talk as well about the opportunity for carbon capture and storage in the sector. So we have a number of levers that we can pull. So I want to start with one example, which I know very well, which is graphene. Now, you may or may not have heard of graphene. Graphene is a carbon nanomaterial, very high performing additive. And if you drive up to, graphene is in the world at the moment. If you drive to Newcastle, you'll drive over a graphene enhanced A1 motorway. If you drive a Ford car, it will have graphene in it. If you're into fell running and you go for a run in the mountains, your trainers will probably have graphene in the soles. So it is being used today, but it's relatively new material being rolled out. You know, it was only isolated in 2004. And it has been long touted as a solution to making concrete and cement more durable and be able to perform better. For example, in our own work with our graphene, we found that adding graphene of 0.0001% by weight shows a 66% improvement in the compressive strength of mortar, for example. So that's an early test for us, but just shows that technology can help to solve the problem of how we decarbonize this sector. Crucially, it's important if we use new materials, we produce them in a sustainable way. And just to elaborate on that example, we make graphene by pulling it out of waste gas. So if you go to Manchester, there's a big United Utilities site there, lots of sewage treatment, and we are working with United Utilities to pull the carbon out of that waste gas, to turn it into graphene, and then to lock that graphene into their concrete and cement to make it last longer. So you have this circular economy benefit of the materials being produced in a sustainable way. So one example, we'll talk about many more over the course of the next hour. Today's conversation will really talk about the challenge, both technically, but also in terms of policy and regulation. What are all the things we have to do collectively to make this work? And through these topics, we'll show that industry really needs to work together and that collaboration is a really important part of what we do. So we hope you leave today inspired with a few new ideas, able to contribute your own ideas and share them with others, and hopefully with a better network of people to work with when we leave the room. So that's the plan. And with that intro, I'm going to hand over to Diana for our first moderated discussion. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks, John. Right, I'm going to stay seated. Hopefully you can all hear me. We're going to kick off our discussion sessions by examining the decarbonisation challenge, with the aim of setting out the policies and regulations required to manufacture, specify and purchase low carbon concrete technologies at scale. So I'm going to be seeking examples from other regions around the world that help us here in the UK. And we're going to touch on definitions around low carbon cement and concrete and what that means to you. Now, we only have 20 minutes, and I think it would be very easy for us to get bogged down in the barriers and leave no time for the solutions. So my challenge to you all today is that every time you mention a barrier, you have to come up with a solution as well. We'll see how that goes. Hopefully, to help speed things up, I'm going to just give a very brief overview of some of those barriers. Now, in order to decarbonise cement, first of all, manufacturers need access to low or zero carbon fuels, which aren't currently readily accessible. They need to increase the use of supplementary cementitious materials and other additives, some of which are reducing in terms of supply, and sometimes can require changes to standards. But most importantly, cement plants need to deploy carbon capture, which requires access to CO2 transport and storage networks, and many UK plants aren't in the best situations for that. And all of this has to be achieved without increasing the cost of cement so much that it results in the UK importing cheaper cements from abroad. Now, alternatives to Portland cement need to be able to quickly scale to meet demand. There are issues with standards potentially slowing down their progress to market. There can be issues of material availability, and there can be a general cautiousness in the construction market to accept new materials. An example is insurers not accepting or putting a considerable premium on construction using innovative materials. I think this is something that also applies to Portland cement-based materials and can prevent the minimisation of clinker in cement, efficient use of cement in concrete, and it's contributing to the over-specification of concrete in construction. Now, there's quite a few examples of low-carbon novel cements not managing to break through to commercialisation, and one barrier is the lack of funding after that innovation stage, and I think we're going to cover that later in the workshop. Now, that was a very quick sprint through some of the barriers, and I realise I haven't covered all of them. I think I'd like to open it up now. If you could try and pick up a microphone when you want to speak, that would be great. There's two. So the first question, how must current policies and regulations change to facilitate the implementation of lower carbon concrete technologies? And can you draw on any examples from other regions? Is there anyone who'd like to kick off?
Well, I can.
Thanks,
All right, I think it's going now. Sorry. So I can kick off from a perspective of another region. Based on my accent, I am from the US. We do have quite a bit in place in terms of carrots, less so sticks, right? So we have a lot of opportunity that is investing in research and development based on the US Department of Energy. They've been putting a lot of time and effort and funding into these. And so regulation hasn't really been the driver for us. Regulation has been something that has always been a little bit on the back burner. It gets suggested and then pulled away. And so we have some localized embodied carbon reduction standards for individual states. New York and New Jersey are some of the leaders in that, and are defining tax credits. Again, these incentives, the carrots rather than the sticks, for people to procure low carbon cement and concrete based products for building. So that's kind of where we're at. We're leading with the carrot rather than a stick for the regulations.
Brilliant, thank you. Yeah, please, go ahead.
So I feel I should maybe jump in as the notional government representative. But, a shameless plug, we've actually just published a report. It's been written by the Cambridge Institute for Sustainable Leadership that directly addresses this question to a degree and includes various policy recommendations, which we'd happily share with anybody who's interested. One of the ones that seems quite obvious but that caught my eye is actually the government driving itself to procure low carbon concrete for lots of the things that it builds.
Thank you. Is that linked to the Industrial Decarbonising Initiative as well, that kind of global initiative to drive green public procurement?
Sorry, I'm not quite sure what that is.
Oh, okay. There's a global initiative called the Industrial Decarbonising Initiative, which is looking at driving the procurement of low carbon cement and concrete for governments?
Okay, no, I wasn't
No,
aware
it's
of that. That sounds
separate.
interesting. It's
Okay.
confusing that we also run something called the Industrial Decarbonisation Initiative, so anyway, this.
Yes.
Sorry.
Anyone else? Oh, yeah, Paul.
Yeah, I can give you an example of a stick in a different country. So Denmark has implemented embodied carbon regulations starting in January this year, and all buildings over 1,000 square meters are required to carry out a whole life carbon assessment and have a limit of 12 kilograms per square meter per year, with an aspiration of 8 kilograms per square meter per year, which is a very tough regulation, and is certainly having repercussions in that country. And consultancies like my own and other manufacturers are obviously racing to make sure that we can meet those regulations. So that is a good example, I think, of where it has been done. It's probably a bit too early yet to see how it's going to respond, but we'll see.
Just out of interest on that, do you, as a company, do you like that stick approach to really drive that decarbonisation, or would you rather go with the US carrot approach?
I think it needs to be a combination of both. So, we have a large range of clients and different projects, and there's always going to be clients who want to aspire to the absolute best they can achieve, and those carrots help them do that when they're a certain scale. But we also need to be bringing up, the rear as well, and making sure that we're bringing up the whole average of the industry. So I don't think it's one or the other. I think it's a combination of both.
Yeah.
And we would support that as well as a company.
Right. Thank you.
I think I can pick up now. I mean, having established that we need to set targets, whether that's positive incentives or whether it's through regulations of limits, how do we then achieve that? And one of the perceived barriers is code compliance and standards. And one of the things that we really think is important to accelerate is the inclusion of novel cement combinations, novel concrete approaches within the standards. And that will take some time, but in the interim, one thing to point, and this is not an example outside of the UK, this is within the UK, is the route that is available to us, design via testing. So we can shift from a pure deemed to satisfy view of code compliance to what performance do we need and what tests are necessary to demonstrate that performance. And we have done that on projects. We're aware that other engineers are going down that route. It is at a project basis at the moment, though, and that is a barrier because there's cost and there's time involved in that testing. So the more that we can accelerate that so that it can be used across projects rather than on a project-by-project basis, will remove that barrier. But it is happening. I think that's something just to take away, that there are projects out there where we are designing on the basis of tests to demonstrate that a concrete outside of the standards is acceptable, outside of the baseline standards, should we say. It's still permitted under the Eurocode to use design by testing.
Thank you. Will, I don't know if this is a good opportunity to bring you in.
Yeah, I thought you might bring me in there. So as I mentioned, we are currently working at BSI on a new performance-based code of practice.
Sorry, Will, you might need to.
Around low carbon technology.
Jinxed it.
Is that better? And yeah, part of this, what I was talking to a few people around me beforehand was, yes, it is a barrier, and we're trying to turn that barrier into a solution by doing a performance-based code of practice, exactly how you entailed. So we are very early into the stage of this development process, but it is a flag standard. It's an iterative standard that BSI are working on that has just begun and will be available for public comment in September. And that will be a real opportunity to feed as much input as we can from anyone really involved in the industry. So yeah, please do contact me if you need, and I can talk more about how to get involved in that.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to? Yeah, did you want to come in?
Thank you. Thank you. To go back on the regulations and policies, we have approved documents that have been built to regulate energy use in buildings. It's good to know that Part Z has been proposed to try to start to report and put thresholds on embodied carbon. And when we know that 15%, 20% of our carbon footprint in a building is actually within the concrete, to start with embodied carbon in the building industry is probably a good starting point. The barrier we have is that we don't yet fully know what good looks like, so we want to put a limit, a threshold, but we've had the LETI, the UK GBCs and others working together now, starting to converge with figures. And coming in summer, we'll have the UK Net Zero Building Standard that have been in consultation for the last year, gathering data and starting to set where we were a few years ago and where we want to go in the future. So there is some hope.
Thank you. That actually really nicely leads me on to my second question around the definition of low carbon cement and concrete. And now this has been an ongoing discussion for a while. We know we need to get to net zero, but as we journey there, what is low carbon? And it is very difficult to get to a common definition. So my second discussion question is, what does low carbon cement and concrete mean to you? And how would you distinguish a low carbon cement? What indicators would you use? And it would just be interesting to see if we've got any common ground here or not. Does anyone want to pick that one up? Athena, thank you.
I have a particular thing for that, as part of the table already knows. So if we need to be looking at it let's say, from a broad perspective. So on these spaces, I personally feel like taking a pragmatic approach, we need to move away just from calling it low carbon. Carbon is an incredible indicator with regards to climate crisis, but it's insufficient to get us, let's say, out of the predicament we find ourselves into at this very moment with, I think it's widely known in this forum, declining resources that help us get to lower carbon concretes, which is where we want to be getting into. But in the end of the day, if we cannot converge into a solution that is truly sustainable and that is very much intertwined with the resources in it, so with using the resources as wisely as possible, it's not just about the common practice that we've all adopted to an extent in order to drive down our carbon footprint, strictly accounting-wise, if you like, the embodied carbon in our mixes, which is to add GGBS, which is brilliant, but we know it's not enough, and it doesn't have a long horizon that can essentially feed us all across the globe, and it doesn't matter whether the emissions come out from SES, from Lendlease, from whoever really. It makes sense to converge into something that can be truly sustainable. Therefore, definition-wise, I think we need to be moving into that, something that does not only restrict itself into embodied carbon, but it contains resource efficiency and the scalability thereof to have a more complete, let's say, way forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone else? Fine, we're only 5 minutes.
Yeah, can I just say to that as well? I think we often lose sight of the fact that we've been using low carbon cements for decades, and we just haven't really branded them as that. It's always been a cheap filler, slag, PFA, super sulfated cements, alkali activated cements. We've used them in the UK since the 70s, at least. So I think we need to be very clear on what the benchmark is. We need to make sure that people who are saying that they're making low carbon concrete and increase their sales of low carbon concrete, that they aren't just rebranding the concrete that they've been making for years anyway. I think that's an important benchmark to set. So coming back to that, how do you define what green cements and green concrete are? I think it has to be something new, it has to be innovative, and it can't just be things that have already been allowed under the standards previously. Or at least that's my take on it anyway.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to come in?
So I guess it's point in time, and you hit the nail on the head there. It wasn't long ago where there were sort of limitations around how much we could put in the mixes when I was an engineer making cubes on site. But actually now we're getting the embodied carbon assessments, but we're getting specifications where there's just a blanket 50% GGBS. And all of a sudden everyone's an expert in GGBS content now. But when you actually look at what we're building, you're trying to slip form, you can't put 50% in everywhere. So I do think the specifications could be sort of fine-tuned at maybe stage 3. Like it depends what, if you're tendering a project or if you're sort of negotiating, you've probably got more chance of doing that with a client. And I think everyone knows that the more you put in, the longer it takes to cure. Striking formwork is key for us to sort of clear the floors, and shorter programs like can win you work, really, can't it? Let's face it. So, but there's some good ideas out there at the minute. We sort of look at maybe the temporary works elements where we could try new things, because there's, you know, there's crane bases and things like that. A lot of concrete go into it, so we should probably be pushing for that and getting some good data that we can use going forward.
That's great. Interesting. Thank you. I think are we at time?
Yeah.
Yeah. Am I passing to you, Jen, or?
You can pass directly.
Okay, brilliant. There we go. We'll get there in a minute.
I'm happy
Over
to
to you
pass
for
it.
topic 2, I think.
Okay, thank you. So topic 2 is materials bridging the gap to net zero. So we'll have a discussion about materials. The main question we're anchoring on is what low carbon innovation pathways are available to reduce embodied carbon emissions from cement and concrete, and how do we overcome barriers to scale up? So that's the key question. I want to start, if I can, with a few inspiring examples, if my panelists can help me find some. So what viable clean tech solutions are available to scale today? I'd like to hear, if I can, to start with the people who are using or producing concrete and cement. Give us a sense of an example and the extent of carbon reduction impact that can have. Any volunteers to go first?
So I'm happy to make a comment.
Thank you.
So one of the big things that's going to change in cement is when the ETS scheme changes and we phase out the free allocations. So free allocations have meant that the cement companies haven't really had to pay the carbon price. And as they're phased out and replaced with CBAM, that's all going to change. So you know, we were talking about incentives in the first question there, but the incentives are going to change quite a lot, because the cost of producing cement, if you have to pay the ETS fees, or if you invest in carbon capture and storage at similar sort of cost, is going to increase. You know, probably the variable cost of clinker is going to increase threefold, maybe even more than that. And obviously the price is going to go up a lot as well. So that will really create a space for other materials. So if we look forward 5 or 10 years, we'll have decarbonized clinker and decarbonized cement, but it'll be a lot more expensive, and therefore maybe other things will be attractive too.
Thank you. Great example. Any others, particularly on how we decarbonize the process of cement and concrete production?
I mean, I can just talk in general about what I kind of see. I've been looking at kind of the embodied carbon reduction trajectory on kind of this near term, this middle term, maybe that bridge technology, and then the long term, right? And so we have a lot of levers that we can play with right now. We have SCMs, we have alternative fuels. People are looking at hydrogen right now on their kilns. So there's a lot of technologies that are available at a very reasonably large scale, you know, but we're not getting that massive reduction in carbon that we want. Maybe it's 20%, maybe it's 30%. But on that 5-year time frame, that's where I really see carbon capture as becoming this really great opportunity to get almost to zero. It's never going to get us to zero, but it will get almost there. And it's a scalable technology. It's a technology that we can look at other industries to deploy, right? So it can be more easily deployed, and we have that distribution network already in place from cement kilns. But looking beyond that, that's when we really have to leave room for innovation of these new materials, right? And that's when we actually have 20 years to start rolling out those scalable and commercially sized facilities. Maybe it's regional based, right? Ready mix suppliers and precasters aren't going to want to learn to work with every single new material that's out there. So maybe it's going to be regional based for those new materials, and then they have to only focus on a new distribution network for a local area, a region, especially in the vastness of the States or in Europe. It's probably going to be a little bit more focused. So that's kind of where I see kind of the now, the bridge, and then the future.
That's great. Thank you, Emily. One clear theme from today is there's no magic wand of a single solution. It's a pathway of things that you do to get down that net zero curve. Another theme has been the need to collaborate. So different companies working together for that journey to happen. I'm interested in examples of where that collaboration has worked. So if you can talk about an example of where your organization has worked with another one, how you've collaborated, and really some tips on turning what is often an interesting first meeting to actually a practical project and step where something gets done. Any examples from the group? Maybe Sam, something you'd like to share?
No, definitely. So I think this has been a huge thing for us as a relatively early stage technology. That early engagement with industry has been really important. The man sat to my left here has been quite a big part of that at AKT too. We engaged with them very early, and the drivers straight away were, what performance do they need to see out of this? How is it going to be delivered? And think about all of these practicalities on site. So just that whole process, I know it's particularly difficult in cement and concrete because you have so many different parties to bring together. You've got the regulatory side we spoke about earlier, the designers, the contractors, the material suppliers. But from my perspective, it is really just that early engagement that's so important. We talk about this all the time. You look at a lot of technologies, particularly ones that come out of academia, and they've perhaps sat in the lab for a bit too long. They've been developed by academics, and they've lost the industrial focus. And then you've got these brilliant minds working on these technologies for huge periods of time, which just doesn't translate. And that's not a position that we can afford to be in right now. We really need to get everyone collaborating as quickly as possible.
I'm just going to say that when it comes to our collaboration, a lot of that has been about having conversations, in-depth conversations about what is being proposed, what are the feedstocks, what are the barriers. So really drilling down into it, not a marketing discussion, but a technical discussion to understand what is resolved, what isn't resolved, what needs to be done. And with that understanding, we open up beyond our traditional boundaries. I think for a long time, as structural engineers, it's been concrete is concrete is concrete. We'll design the structure, just give us the concrete. We want the strength. We need to go beyond that now. We need to get back into understanding as far as we can, and with the help of those that have the specialist knowledge, the chemistry, the industrial processes, how things are built again. If we're starting to talk about material efficiency, we're going to be looking at going maybe back to some older ways of constructing, even just simple things like ribbed slabs and trough slabs. People have been saying, no, we can't do that. It's going to take too long, and it's going to be too costly. We've got to investigate that again and ask why, not just accept it. Why, and has it changed? Yeah. So I think that's one of the things that we're always looking for is those in-depth conversations. We might not understand it the first time. Sam has to explain things to me 3 or 4 times before I get it, but it's really important.
That's great. Thank you very much. I'm interested from this side of the table, where when you're constructing projects, what has to happen for your construction project to adopt new ideas, new technology quickly? Interested in your views.
I can give you an example as well. I think what we know is that the supply chain from client to engineer, cost manager, subcontractor, and actual site, it's a big long chain. And this technology can't just come from one side because it's going to run into barriers up or down that chain. So we need to have a clear alignment and focus on trying to reduce carbon in concrete on a project. And an example, we worked with Canary Wharf Group and adopted the Concrete Zero principles. Canary Wharf Group really set out from the get-go that they were going to adopt lower carbon concrete on their project, and the supply chain had to fall into step and adapt and learn. And it's been a real journey for everyone on that supply chain, and that has allowed a development for the next project to move forward again. So I think the real key here is to get everyone on the supply chain aligned around a common goal. It doesn't really work if one party tries to introduce something new by themselves. So,
Great.
And from a purely practical perspective, boots on the ground, literally pouring the concrete, constructing stuff, building stuff. There's so many different parameters that come into play when it comes down to what is actually going to be poured, and therefore what is going to be the cementitious content and subsequent carbon footprint and all the rest of it that comes after all these massive, let's say, endeavors that may have happened at design stage and way beyond just the strength. There's so much that has to do with the concrete installation, so with the placement of the concrete, with pouring it in the right way, in the right time, in the right consistency, that drives, that affects what actually goes into the mix, which then again may have us detracting, which eventually means that we have even, let's say, more space and room in the value chain to involve contractors, to involve engineers, to involve obviously the supply chain that is essentially providing this concrete, so the constructors and contractors, in order to decarbonize effectively. And I'm not even touching into the internal, let's say, concrete delivery mechanisms in each project, like things that are back to basics, but we are not always getting right. And that can be the reality of every project to one extent or the other.
That's great, thank you. And Paul, I'm interested in the land lease, really examples of you brought new technology really well. So I think you can hear about half the words I'm saying, can't you? So maybe you pass me the microphone.
I think we heard it. I think you were saying what's Lend-Lease experience and how can we help bring new technologies to the fore? I mean, in a sense, I'm not sure that it is our role to bring technologies to the fore other than simply to express our demand. So, you know, Lend-Lease has set targets to, as many companies have, of course, to be net zero carbon by 2025, but rather more interestingly, to be absolute zero carbon, scopes 1, 2, and 3 by 2040. And that includes concrete and steel and aluminium and glass and so on. And I think it's really important that we don't try and back winners, that we don't try and specify materials or solutions. I don't think that's our job. Our job is to be very clear about what we're demanding and allow the experts, including some of the people in this room, to innovate and come up with the right solutions, and that will change over time. And by the way, just going back to the earlier conversation about policymakers, I think it's really important that they do the same. They shouldn't try and prescribe solutions. They should try and specify outcomes, and that is all to do with, you know, the kind of the ambition in terms of the carbon reduction trajectory that we need to be on to achieve net zero or absolute zero carbon. So I think that's the key thing. And again, in terms of the collaboration, that of course is why Concrete Zero is so essential, because it's brought all of the different actors together across the value chain. You know, we can bring investors with us, co-developers, you know, our own clients. We can talk to our designers, the engineers, the producers, the suppliers. You know, everybody can better understand the role that they can play. And I think it's helpful if people who are actually producing those innovative materials are actually in a room and they can hear from the client who's demanding them.
Just to, oh, sorry.
Sorry, just wanted to add, I'm an outsider to this industry. Over the years of investing in clean tech, we've invested in practically everything other than the building industry because we thought, okay, you guys are not interested. But we now see that there is interest. As far as I can say, the two directions. One side says, let's do it as we've always done, but we'll do carbon capture, we'll do hydrogen with carbon capture. And now, I worked on my first carbon capture financing 22 years ago. It was too expensive then. I think it's still too expensive now. Will continue to be expensive. I think if you are price sensitive, as I know you are, that will be a difficult one, which is why we are looking at new chemistries, new processes, and so on. For us, the worry with going that route is that will the industry accept it? And I think what I'm hearing is the industry, in order to avoid high cost, but comply with regulations, might just accept it, which is great. So as an investor, that tells me go ahead and invest.
So to kind of tie the last 2 points together. I was at a Portland Cement Association conference and I gave a presentation on what CCS would do to the cost of the cement and what would that do to the price of a building. Um, and I asked the whole room, who has heard of the term embodied carbon? And nobody raised their hand except for maybe one or two people. So I think it's part of it is the education. We're not trying to pick winners, but I think we need to educate kind of both ends of the spectrum to get the cement manufacturers and concrete manufacturers to know why there's a drive and a demand for it, right? You have a demand for it, but a lot of people that are doing these projects don't quite understand why they're doing it. Besides, it's the green thing to do. They don't understand that link to embodied carbon. And so when I presented to them this case study of, okay, well, realistically, if you increase the price of cement manufacturing by twofold, threefold, it really only has like a 5% impact on building cost. So it's that type of education as well, as they thought nobody would buy their product. Who would buy cement that's threefold the price? But when you look at an overall building increase, it's really so much on labor rather than cement, right? And so there's plenty of our clients out there that have these really big ESG targets that they'll pay a little bit more for a building for it to be, 40, 60% greener. So there is that education line that also is needed, is connecting both ends of the industry, the producers and the users.
Just on the point of carbon capture, if it happens, great. But if we look at the alternatives, we find new ways of producing, then what have we got? We've got a positive, right? It's even better. It's removing the demand on carbon capture. So if that's happening, and really the big movement in that field is outside of construction, it's a different technology. If it happens, great. But we have a responsibility within construction to look for new ways of making the binders that we need. And if we do that, then it's a positive. We've made things better. And where we're really interested is when, let's say, you can combine a new process with existing infrastructure. That's brilliant because we can see then a credible route to scaling very quickly. So if we can take, for example, CO2 that might be being produced through conventional cement manufacture, use that CO2 now as a useful product in a co-product, even better. And these sorts of things do exist. So it's just, carbon capture and storage, we find that if we're putting all of our eggs in that basket, we're not really hedging our bets. And what's the worst that could happen?
That's great, thank you. If it's all right, I'm going to bring the panel to a close and move on to the... I've gone again, yeah, let me use that. Okay, thank you. So I think one clear theme from this is know your role in the value chain. You made a great point that really, if you take the customer demand down, knowing what your role is it to feed in the new technology? Is it to demand certain standards? Is one theme that came out. Another one was get technical relatively early. Don't leave those detailed conversations to 6 months down the line and then it falls over. If it's going to fall over, let it fail fast. And we heard some good examples of collaboration as well. So thank you. With that, Ian, I think I'm handing over to you for topic 3.
Thank you. Hopefully mine will work. We'll see how it goes. So the topic 3 we want to talk about is cross-industry or cross-sector collaboration. I don't know, this seems to be a bit weird. Can you hear me okay? Yeah, all right. Roman, I wanted to come to you because I remember when I was working for Holcim about 15 years ago, we had an initiative globally where we tried to work with contractors looking at both cost and carbon and the impact of using higher strength materials so that you could use less of them. And Bouygues was the only contractor that was even remotely interested in talking to us about this. And the only project we worked on was a tower in Ho Chi Minh City in Vietnam. But I think today that situation has changed, and there's a willingness on the part of contractors and developers and so on to engage much earlier. So I wondered if you had any comments on how you think the willingness of contractors and others in the supply chain to collaborate has changed.
yes, we are as a group. We are a global group, so we operate, in all parts of the world, and we've been very early engaged on. We are engineers, so quite technically minded, and indeed, carbon at some point becomes technical, and we've been very early engaged with partners to reduce carbon. Early strength, or for example, as we speak, 56-day strength approach is something that is quite common now in most foundations. So this is something that actually a few years ago was not that followed, and in just a couple of years is becoming mainstream. That's a good progress in very short period of time. And in regards to innovation, again, a few years ago, from 2019, we partnered with Hoffman Green Cement and developed an R&D full campaign to support these startups and business into becoming what they are today, which are becoming more and more mainstream again. So I'm glad some large groups can support young companies and be at the forehead of a new mindset, I'd say.
So I think often collaboration and innovation are talked of in rather generic terms, and I've attended two presentations at this exhibition where people have talked about this, but it doesn't get us very far unless we have some concrete examples. I'm sorry, piling up the puns here on the paving the way to the future, but I wonder if any of you have any concrete examples of where this sort of cross-sector collaboration has led to reduced carbon.
Yeah, I mean, happy to say that, Lendlease is also a member of Concrete Zero's sister initiative, Steel Zero, and also a member of Responsible Steel, and they're working very closely together. And that's been absolutely essential for us in terms of getting together not only with our peers and competitors within sector, but in that instance, out of sector as well. So I took part in a forum that Steel Zero organised in Copenhagen last year, and I was sitting alongside some of the biggest shipping companies, wind turbine manufacturers, automotive companies, and so on, all demanding low carbon steel. And that's very, very powerful, obviously. And I think, although there are important differences with concrete, I think that's absolutely essential. I'm sitting here, as I said, we've got some pretty bold targets. I can feel proud about the fact that I can report a year-on-year 53% reduction in our scope 1 and 2 emissions. That feels pretty good until I then tell you that 99% of my emissions are scope 3 and 84% of those are upstream embodied carbon in concrete and steel and aluminium. So, and we know by definition we can't tackle that on our own. We're a tiny drop in the concrete ocean, as it were, even though we're a big company. So we have to do it collaboratively. And the most critical thing, and it is the thing that Concrete Zero are most focused on, is the collection of very clear, transparent, and consistent data. Because that then gets rid of the smoke and mirrors about old products being repackaged as new, products that are using finite materials, which really are a stopgap or a bit of a transition in terms of the extent of GGBS being used. We know it's finite. We know that's not ultimately going to be the solution of everybody. So we have to bring in new technologies. But if people are transparent about how it's being used, where it's being used, the trajectory that we're on, as I say, we don't want to be prescriptive. But what we do need is a level playing field where everybody can see the data in and the data out, and I think that's the way we'll see progress.
Okay, thank you.
I think just to add to that very briefly, it's a really important point because at the moment there's a tension between what can be best for a project to achieve a target and what is best for the industry as a whole, or best for demand as a whole. Systems, I think we were talking about systems earlier on, and initiatives like Concrete Zero, if we get them to the right scale, can give us that overarching picture in terms of data, but can also give us a forum to discuss what that system change should be, so that we don't lose sight of it by just following blindly the requirements of a particular project and then just moving scarce resources around, and it's not the end game. Totally agree.
Yeah. I think this point is also relevant when we think about the global problem. 90% round numbers of cement and concrete is used in the developing world. And, what we're talking about here is fundamentally European and a bit of North American. And actually, this year it's got harder to talk to cement companies in the developing world about climate action because the overall economic picture that they're facing has got worse. So it's something that we have to bear in mind when we think about the overall system. Sorry.
I was going to give an example to your question about collaboration leading to something having impact. So we sold one of our loop units to a company called Stugalux in Luxembourg. They're a building construction company that make lots of housing. And the way that our loop system works, they get lots of hydrogen to power their facilities, and they make lots of graphene. So they've turned around to their paint and concrete suppliers and said, you need to use this graphene in your paint or in your concrete. And those paint companies, if they want to sell their paint to this construction company, they've got to use that material. So for us, it's fantastic because it finds a home for that product, but it's coming back to your point around knowing your place in the value chain, because their customer is demanding it of them because it lowers their carbon. And for us, I suppose, unsurprisingly, the rate of interest that's driving in those companies is much quicker. And that collaboration has been, essential to making that happen.
There are examples. Do you want to say something? For one thing.
It's almost like I'm thinking, I'm scratching my head because we've got a big project we're delivering it, so it's almost like it's internal, but at the same time very much cross-cutting across different disciplines, from design all the way to literally putting it in the ground. And it is a journey to get everyone on the same page, very much back to the education point, very much back to the points made around how we define what good looks like. And this particular last point about the fact, more broadly speaking, and more about leadership and more, let's say, wider collaboration globally. We need to keep in mind that we need to be very cautious with how we determine our targets, because eventually we will all have to break them down and scale them down to our own projects or remits whatsoever. And it may as well be, which we're experiencing already in the here and now, that in order to achieve, let's say, individual lower carbon targets, we're ending up with solutions that are not necessarily the best for the common good, which, well, we eventually have to really serve if we want a better future.
I mean, you've tempted me now to bring up something else. Actually, you tempted me already, Paul, but I resisted for a moment. But it strikes me that, obviously not you guys because you're too smart for this, but there are companies in this sector who have made commitments on reduction in embodied carbon, for example. And maybe they made these commitments before they started measuring Scope 3 or about the same time. Perhaps they didn't fully understand what they were taking on board. I just wonder if, in your experience, your own companies, or perhaps it will be easier to answer for your customers or suppliers, fully understood what the targets were going to mean to them. Paul, I can see that you are.
Yeah, you've got me going now. So it's interesting. I said we've set this target to be absolute zero carbon by 2040. The bit I left out, which I normally add, is in brackets without offsets.
Yeah.
Okay. And every time I see Paul, he says to me, Paul, have you figured out yet how you're going to achieve absolute zero carbon without offsets? And I say no, but fortunately we've got a little bit of time left to figure it out. But the interesting point about that is that Lendlease is quite ambitious. It's been ambitious around sustainability for a very long time. But it's also, like lots of companies, in many ways quite conservative. And so it was a fascinating process to get there. And it did it on the back, without getting too bogged down, on the back of joining up to TCFD, the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosure. And our top execs around the world took part in workshops where they began to understand the ramifications, the risk associated with the kind of projects we work on, which tend to be very large and very long term. Many projects we're working on today will still be working on in close to 2050. And thinking about the real risks. And they went in and they set that target with their eyes wide open. And what I found really interesting about talking beyond net zero, actually, is that it brings a new lens to bear on this conversation, and it's already bringing around quite a lot of innovation in people's thinking. And when you start, if you think that you can just buy your way out of jail, as it were, by buying offsets, it kind of lets you off the hook. If you think you've got to decarbonize completely, it brings around different kinds of thinking. And I think, for example, in terms of talking about collaboration, I think one of the challenges I'd put back to the concrete industry is, who should you be collaborating with? What unlikely bedfellows might you collaborate with more radically? Because at the end of the day, if you look at this from a buildings point of view, we're not going to build just buildings out of concrete. We're going to look for hybrid solutions. We're going to use more timber. We'll use more low carbon steel. And for the foreseeable future, we'll be using concrete. But is there more that the concrete industry could be doing to collaborate with other sectors in the way that we're collaborating, as I said, with automotive, shipping and others to drive demand in other spaces?
So if I could respond on behalf of concrete, I'm really a cement guy, but I'm trying to be a concrete guy. From the cement standpoint, I think this is a terrible challenge that the industry tends to be a bit complacent about. Because what you care about is some concrete. You didn't even mention cement, right? So we know that you're going to need concrete, but are you going to make it with cement is perhaps not quite so certain, at least not for all of the applications. And I think, the industry hasn't quite sort of recognized just what opportunities there are to move away from cement, as I say, at least for the non-structural applications and maybe others as well.
Could I pick up on that and take it one step further, that in the end use, or for the end user, they're not even looking for concrete, they're looking for an outcome, a performance. And what we've been trying to do is reframe the question. So I think, Romanelli, we were talking about higher strength concrete. And so instead of thinking about CO2 per volume of material or per mass, let's put it into, I'm a structural engineer, let's put it into stiffness units and strength units. So now it's CO2 per performance, not per volume. We don't care about volume, right? We care about performance. And I think that is a useful way of thinking about the challenge. And then it becomes the challenge of how do we maintain an economy where we use less and we focus on performance. And there are examples. When we look at reuse, there's an expectation that it'll be a small amount of material that might go into strengthening a column, but it'll be more expensive per unit.
Yeah.
We accept that, but we struggle to accept it in other arenas. Why is that? And can we change the framing so that we're not just selling structures by the kilo,
Yes.
we're selling them by the performance.
Yeah, and I think that's a very good point. And actually, it's connected to products like graphene or carbon nanomaterials, where, just a little tiny bit will make a big difference to performance. 'Cause, in cement and concrete, we used to think about heavy materials, right? And everything's kind of the same weight. But when you start adding in those kind of materials and making a big impact, suddenly you could be using much less, yeah?
Yeah, it actually helps if you use less graphene and not more. So when we're told, well, we're asked, what's the price per kilo? It's the wrong question. The question is, what's the price for this performance impact? I completely agree with you.
And anyway, it's very good news for material suppliers. I've worked for material suppliers most of my career. We love customers who want to buy performance. Sorry, you want to say something?
Sorry, I was going to kind of talk about a collaboration or a competition between industries, right? We have steel versus concrete, and I think you brought up a really good point. It was, we're selling structures, not materials, and I think they're always pitted against each other, and each industry is trying to say that my product is greener. And for a while, in the States at least, we have a lot of electric arc furnaces for steel manufacturing, so it's pretty low EPD. And they've just sat there and, sitting pretty thinking, oh, you concrete people have to do your reduction to catch up with us. Once we do, then I think it's going to push that industry to look at, how do they get their industry down to a net zero level. And then we're going to it's going to keep going back and forth. So I think that type of competition, but yet somehow it's a collaboration, will be really important as well. We're going to keep pushing each other because it's going to make more structures go in one direction or the other depending on how that overall industry looks.
How are we doing on time?
We are doing fine. We've got until 4:40.
Okay.
So if you have some more questions, or we can start to wrap up.
Well, I mean, coming back to collaboration, Simon, I mean, you've got quite a lot of examples of collaboration within the supply chain. I don't know if there's any that you'd like to share.
Specifically in terms of novel cements or AACMs, then they're all at very early stages. Romain mentioned about Hoffman Green. And I think some of the work that they've done over on the continent has been quite inspiring in terms of them bringing those sort of thought processes back to the UK, getting the engagement with the engineers, with the end users, with everybody who's got the interest in what the performance of the product is. The difficult piece is getting it pulled right through, coming back to where you sit in the supply chain and the value that you bring. So you can have a client who has the dream, you can have an engineer who's prepared to put their reputation on the line to specify these products, get that performance. You can have a tier one contractor who's got their journey and they're on board as well. But when it comes down to the guy in the concrete physically pouring it, if there's anything in the scope of their works that allows them to do something different, they'll just go with the low cost option, which is the grey option at the minute because the novel materials are priced more expensively. But the exercise that we've done suggests that on an average building, if you use a novel cement, it will increase the price of the concrete by 20%, 30% per cubic metre, but in the building, the overall scheme, it's only 1%. I mean, you're taking a product that's got less than 250 kilograms of CO2 per tonne, EPD verified externally, versus 861 as the MPA average figure for cement, then the benefit of doing it is massive, but it's making sure that it's done at ground level is the challenge.
Okay.
Where there might be some work on collaboration is once you've got your client, your designer, yourself as a contractor, then the guys pouring the concrete and the suppliers with them, you have still some insurers to come in the loop, and some building control in the middle, and they are quite knowledgeable. They are pretty technical, sometimes much more than what we would have expected from insurers, but they're very good at that. And they need to be brought in there because they are a key player. And if they are not on board, if they have doubt, it will never go through unless it's for a secondary piece of wall somewhere.
Yeah, absolutely.
I almost daren't say it, but of course, most of the major companies that will pour the concrete in these projects are owned by cement producers. So that can provide a bit of a challenge as well.
Could I just come back quickly to my point before about data? Because, you know, where we would like to get to within a couple of years' time, I mean, you made the point about actually our ability to report on scope 3. And for a company like ours, active around the world, that's going to be a pretty big challenge. It's certainly going to be an impossible challenge if we actually have to go out and manually interrogate every project and every supplier and try and collect the data batch by batch, and it's simply unworkable. So what we want to see is a world where in a couple of years' time, we're having concrete delivered to a project site, and batch by batch, not just per contract for the whole job, but batch by batch, we want LCA data being uploaded as that batch of cement in concrete, is being delivered to a site. So we can aggregate that data globally. And I think that's why we need everybody across the value chain on the same page about what is that data, how can we collect it consistently, take the pain out of that. You know, in a digital world, we should expect to see, and we will no doubt see, people competing for our business in terms of platforms that are, you know, coded accordingly to collect that data consistently. And that's why we need everybody in the room and everybody on board with Concrete Zero. And by the way, I will plug again Concrete Zero, because I think what we should be doing is actually asking all of our supply chain to be joining Concrete Zero for that very reason.
Okay, thank you. Okay, yeah, no, I think we start.
On this, coming from, let's say, a background that is heavy on the accounting side, so the carbon quantification, and being more geared towards achieving outcomes, I'm very much intrigued by what you said, because we need to also be cautious where we kind of draw the line of putting too much burden, for instance, in the accounting side of things, and where we're kind of having this probably cloud our judgment and getting too focused on getting the numbers rather than the outcomes. The batch by batch, for instance, approach, if you mean it on a batch by batch basis, what in terms of what we bring into a project rather than a massive batch produced at a plant, it can be too onerous, I believe, and this is something that can potentially detract the forces that we need to keep joined towards achieving better concrete in the end of the day. So all I'm saying is we're going to be cautious where we draw the line between data and action, and, you know, not having the perfect be the enemy of the good and miss the boat. That's all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Stafford, you've been a bit quiet there in the corner. I wondered whether you'd like to say something about Innovate UK and the role that you think that Innovate UK can play in sort of stimulating the sector.
Well, yeah, I've been thinking, you know, we're actually funding 3 quite large projects at the minute that are, so it's collaborations, but in an innovation sense. I think one of them's developing, mentioning arc furnaces, cement that's actually recycled in an arc furnace, which is quite interesting. It's called Cambridge Electric Cement. Another's using glass, and another that's looking at a different, I think it's a clinker production method. And they all have large consortiums of different stakeholders you need to develop and pilot something. I mean, obviously, we provide innovation funding. You know, we kind of operate up to kind of like pre-commercial demonstration. It's an earlier stage, more labcrete, which is a phrase I learned today. That sounds good. And really, we see our barrier, our job is to solve some of these barriers, and that's our kind of role. You know, we have to almost like by mandate address what we would call a market failure in a kind of government techno-economic speak. So, I mean, this has been fascinating for me to sit here and learn, because we are ramping up a program on concrete, what some of the barriers are. And then this will help me in the designing of my interventions in terms of how we can potentially address some of them. So yeah, keen to kind of learn more and get going. And as well, we talk about our role, really. We use inspire, involve, invest is our kind of catchphrase. So obviously the invest is the grants that we offer to address barriers, but collaboration, I mean, I used to work in innovation on the other side of the table, and a grant is a good way of getting people to collaborate. You know, money kind of greases the wheels. But then I'd like to think as well we can gather some of this excellent knowledge around the table and share it widely, like the report we just had published as well, and provide a bit of inspiration too.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Can I ask you just for what the UK has come in for some criticism about the availability of scale-up funding, and I suppose the stock market, the London stock market, has also been accused of not really being able to provide you know, IPO level funding. I just wondered if you had any thoughts about that, or any areas where you think we're going to see new initiatives to address that gap.
It's funny you mentioned that, actually. So the program I'm working on, even though it's focused on concrete, the broader mission is how we accelerate finance, which is why we're interested in demand signals. We're talking to obviously people like Concrete Zero Climate Group, is the broader goal, and we see that as a route to accelerate private finance into not only the things we fund, but climate tech. I mean, we're the biggest funder in climate tech by some distance. It's about £1 billion a year. So we acknowledge there's a problem, and we're starting on a bit of a journey to see not maybe how we can address that directly, but how we can encourage innovation in the financial sector to help the kind of private markets address it to a degree. But funnily enough, we've also just signed an agreement with the London Stock Exchange. So in terms of how we can collaborate and explore these things. So it's something we're aware of. I think it's quite a widely acknowledged problem, and we're looking at how we can potentially address it. And yeah, we'll watch this space. But I think sometime over the next 2 years, things could start quite get interesting as well in terms of how things may change in government as well. So yeah, we'll see.
Okay.
Excellent, thank you very
I
much.
was going to suggest we hand it back to you.
Can I add something on that final question? I think it's, you're right, Innovate UKRI has been a big source of funding. A lot of deals that we invest in, we find that sometimes majority or all our co-investors are from overseas. Thankfully, there's been no shortage of people wanting to come and invest in UK technology, which is great. But now, in the last year or so, you hear Barclays, Legal General, Aberdeen, others are putting money aside for investing in UK technology. So I suppose this event is an example of people getting interested. So money from UK is coming, and it's been always coming from overseas anyway.
So I have an extensive summary of key points that I'll maybe run through a couple of them and then ask the moderators for 2 of their reflections. One of the first things we heard was carrots and sticks. So really interesting different type of regulations or incentives are we looking at here. How that's different in different regions, North America, UK. We thought we had until 4:40, so we thought we had another 10 minutes. Carrots and sticks. Public procurement was another really important piece that came up. Here we're talking about private sector procurement, but how can we merge, align and mobilise public sector procurement? We heard example from Denmark that's already got limitations with regards to the embodied carbon regulation. So a plethora of different ways in which policy can be interacting with the work that we're doing here in the market. Second session was a really interesting point raised around the change of incentives when the cost of carbon is actually being embedded into business models and decision making. A lot of the companies we work with actually have an internal carbon price that's fundamentally changing the decisions they're making in terms of the materials that they're putting into their future projects. So how that's going to change and then expand and broaden, and I think was mentioned creating a space for alternative materials and constituent materials and technologies being brought into this discussion. We just heard a time frame of 2 years in those last couple of sentences on how this is going to be mobilising. That's absolutely what we need to see. 2025 is 2 years away. Early engagement and really in-depth conversations on a technical level, talking about chemistry, talking about material efficiency, really getting to the why. This is exactly those types of conversations that need to manifest and then scale going forward. And then in the third session, one of the really key pieces I picked up was that clear, transparent and consistent data and targets, methodologies. Yes, we have to be very careful not to have unintended consequences, etc., for what we're asking for. So actually that's looking more to an outcome, performance-based lens as opposed to prescriptive solutions. So those are some of the thoughts that certainly came through to me. Would 3 of Diana, Ian and John just like to share maybe one sentence of reflection?
Gosh, one sentence.
Or a couple of sentences.
I was going to say, I've got 2 points, I think, that you didn't...
Show us
try that one. The one was the standards issue and the need for performance-based standards that don't require every single project to do it. And the other thing was the low carbon cements, and it needs to be broader than just low carbon. It's got to be resource efficiency and sustainability in general.
Our main theme was that new materials will be part of the solution, and keeping in mind what the material does and its outcome is really important to drive change.
So my takeaway is really the enthusiasm of everybody around the table to do something about this. And I think, Athena, you said that we mustn't let the excellent get in the way of doing the good things. And I think there's really a willingness to get on with things. And I think that's good news for us.
Excellent, thank you very much. I think that characterises exactly whom we've brought together in the table and then more broadly everyone who's been interested. So I hope you found this extremely useful as well, and please do come and either talk to all of the participants or ourselves, myself and Eva, who leads the Concrete Zero initiative, and we can take this forward as that cross-sector collaboration. Thank you very much.